by saying that there's an English saying that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over, which basically sums up years and decades of how the water justice movement have fought against water privatization, not only of services but also of resources control and management. And in a sense, like I think in health, in the morning panel today, water has really become an arena of social contestation and mobilization, as well as also alternatives building. So my sharing with you for this sort of still morning, close to lunchtime, will really draw in from my experience as an activist and campaigner based in the Philippines, with a tradition in the left of, expose, oppose, and then propose. But also based on my engagement with a global network called the Reclaiming Public Water Network, which 9 years ago was created in response to a conjuncture, which is the need for a collective response and aspiration to promote progressive models of public water management and also have a counter discourse to the PPP, or which is the public-private partnership model, which the World Bank and other neoliberals are promoting all over the world. And just a very short introduction on the RPW. It's a very loose, horizontal, and flat network which really brings in together different actors, as what Trevor was saying a while ago, of trade unionists, progressive public water operators, activists, scholars, academics, and civil society groups to promote and build together an alternative discourse, but also practice and the advocacy of having a democratic public water systems. And for my input, I only have 15 minutes and maybe less now. I would like to make 3 observations, or I think lessons from my limited experience in trying to build a pro-public movement on water. First is around on the point that the solutions, or at least from our experience, the solutions to water problems around the world, especially when you talk about alternatives, are very context specific, and they really vary from really wide scale, from centralized public utilities to community level water systems. They depend on institutional arrangement, etc. But I think some of the things that sort of hold them together, or why we deem them as alternatives as such, is based on certain principles that we as activists and also part of the global social justice movement hold in common. And I sort of deem this as ETAP, which I will further elaborate later. The second point is I would like to go into the issue of some of the consensus points around the definition of what we mean as public, what does public mean, and what does publicness comprise, and some of the tensions and contradictions that we need to grapple with as we move forward as a movement. And finally, share with you some concrete handle, or a very specific concrete campaign handle and common entry point that we've been using that allows us to work together at various levels and also rally various actors around. And if I have time, I would like to pose some questions to you, which really has been bugging me, which have been bugging me in the last decade and making my nights sleepless sometimes. So, on the first point, like I said, when we talk about alternatives to water privatization and redefining or reimagining the public based on evidence and empirical experiences of people, one, there is really no perfect alternative. I think David McDonald has already pointed that to us during the opening plenary on Sunday. And there's really no one-size-fits-all solutions to all water problems in the world. And that alternatives are really very context-specific and vary in terms of scale, political, historical, social-cultural, and economic context, institutional arrangement, governance structures, and management models. And even the question of replicability is a big issue, whether you can replicate what's happening in Bolivia to the Philippines, or the Philippines to India, and other places in the world. But there are really wide-ranging models of alternatives. One is models of public water service delivery, which are either old style, which is we deem as corrupt, inefficient, and untransparent. And there are many examples of that. You can take a look at models like the Bangkok's Metropolitan Water Authority in Thailand, which they have strengthened public water utilities through having a strong public ethos and management and also a pro-worker workplace. You have democratization experiments, like in the case of Tamil Nadu in India, where they were involved in a massive state-level change management process, which involves shift in perspectives and attitudes of water engineers and transformation of the institutional culture inside the water utility system, which is very technical. You know, when you talk to engineers, they only think about the technical issues and not really looking at water as a social, political, and cultural issue. And they've done this in such a very interesting manner that they've used process-oriented participatory methodology, which is based in the experience or the tradition of India, and particularly in Tamil Nadu, which is called Kodam, a Tamil word for gathering for social for gathering a social space, and for consensus building that implies harmony, diversity, equality, and justice. And then you also have other models of, in terms of resource management and protection of watershed, upstream and downstream cooperation and multi-sectoral cooperation. And a very striking example is in the case of New York City State, where the New York City State, the water utility, publicly invested money in a program to enable farmers in the upstream, which is they're living in the Catskill watershed area, which is the main source of water for the residents of New York, to implement a new farming program that is compatible with a healthy watershed and pure quality water for the city. The idea behind this, which was really came from the initiative of the public water operator, is that if you have a good environment, it will produce good water. So you can actually save lots of public resources by investing in a good watershed program involving the community, rather than invest money into into very expensive treatment facilities, which of course the private sector is also at that time, 20 years ago, was tendering a bid for. So that's one. And then you have the other extreme of these alternatives, which really is very local, community-based water systems in the form of cooperatives, associations, associative water systems that are actually bridging the gap in water service provision in many parts of the world, especially in the global south. And this has happened because the reality is, in many parts of this community, central water utilities have really failed to provide the service that the community needs. And it's through the self-help initiative of the community, by organizing the waterless, that they were able to at least bridge that gap and organize themselves. And unfortunately, in many cases, many of them have still no support from local or national government. So they themselves has actually been trying to organize themselves, at least in the case of the Philippines, to gather that national support through technical, finance, and also policy support to be able to become sustainable community water systems, and not just fail because they have many constraints to address. But again, while there is a far-ranging range of alternatives, the reason why we see them as alternatives is that they are based on principles of ETAP, equity, equality, transparency, accountability, and participation. And these are not just principles in the sake of principles, but they're actually being practiced in the way that the public service delivery system is being organized and being done. And practices of solidarity and public ethos are, of course, very, very important. And I think this is really one of the demands, or at least the ideas coming from the union, is that for you to be able to say that the public water system is functioning and working and democratic, you need to have respect for labor in the workplace. And I think that's very, very important. So I will go now to the second point, which is on the meanings and definitions of public and publicness, because I think in the last couple of days, we've been hearing what really does public mean and what does publicness mean. Within the RPW network, there is really no simple belief that the public sector, or at least the narrow definition as governments, is inherently good. We don't believe that. We don't have a sense philosophical belief that it's inherently good. And in fact, a lot of the organization inside the RPW are in opposition movements and holds a strong critique of the government, even as it pushes for the provision of the much-needed basic services. So we say that not all ways of doing public are acceptable, but I think the bottom line is how to reclaim or how to redefine and reimagine the public and notions of publicness and what do we mean by it. And that, of course, includes redefining relationships between the state, the public service providers, and also the people that they purport to serve. One of the consensus points that we have reached, at least in RPW, is that at least when you talk about the public, it's very different from the private. In the very nature of these two entities and their objective. The public, meaning not only the government or in its agencies, but public as also people, supposed to adhere to the principles of equity and democracy and provide services for the common good. But most importantly, stand with the poor and marginalized, especially those who do not have water on a daily basis. And for the private, it's very clear that their starting point is privatize the public, but socialize the risk. And their bottom lines are pretty much profit and their shareholders' interest. So the question then is whether the public versus private dichotomy helps. And in certain ways, yes and no. Because if you work at the international level, and if you have the likes of big corporations who have a whole network themselves, there's a federation called now the Aquafed, which is being led by Veolia and the likes of Suez. You need to have that kind of debate, at least at the ideological level, that hey, you're very different from the public, and you have actually no business in providing water services in the parts of the world. And but at the same time, sometimes it doesn't also help just to be trapped within the public versus private debate, because and this was brought forward by our comrades from Latin America, that at least in their context, when you talk about the public, it usually just means the state or government. And where's the role of community in it? Where's the role of the people and citizens? You talk about representative democracy. So in a sense, there's also a need to use that debate, but in certain places, but also internally and also as a movement, you also need to expand that debate and not be trapped within just this dichotomy. On another, I think, major issue that we've been trying to grapple with is that there is a lot of contradictions that we really haven't found answers and resolutions on. And there's a number of issues within the water justice movement and even within the RPW that we haven't come to terms. One is has to do with coming up with a common language and the kind of meanings that we put into it. I mean, we just talk among us as activists, but if you deal with public water operators, they have a whole set of language that sometimes we're very uncomfortable with. Take the example of efficiency. If you talk to a public water operator, efficiency is quite a different thing as what you mean. And there's a big discussion around whether we want to use efficiency, because on the extreme side, they're saying that efficiency has been used as a frame by the private sector for their own private sector priorities. And then there's a whole debate about financing and public investments. Is it all right to get money from the EU or the World Bank if we can use it for progressive and pro-poor public water system and promotion of the public interest? That's a big debate. I would go into the final point because I only have 1 minute, but perhaps we can delve into these contradictions later on into the discussion. I think while we deal with the nitty-gritty and big questions as campaigners and organizers and also as academics and trade unionists, we need to have short-term political goals and targets, which can be building blocks that will help us achieve our long-term vision of recreating societies, of recreating economies, building democratic public services, and rolling back the power of transnational corporations. And one way to do this is we need concrete handles, campaign handles, common entry points to be able to work together and rally different forces around. This is a practical thing that we've been doing as campaigners and as activists, and I think Mira will talk about that more later on. But just to give you an example, one thing that the Reclaiming Public Water Network has been using is using the public-public partnerships or public-community partnerships and community partnerships as an organizing tool and counter discourse to PPP. And this has really brought together a different range of actors that are trying to restore our confidence and to the public and redefining a new public. So and finally, I would like to emphasize, sorry Trevor, a couple of minutes, that organizing, building local constituencies, and your base are very important in building a global pro-public movement. And we really need to ensure that their concerns and sentiments shape international policy agenda. But I also think that we need to look at the issue of power. We need to be aware of the issue of power within our movements. Who sets the agenda? Whose voice is heard? How do we deal with issues of representation? How do we transcend sectoral, geographic, gender, and class and caste divides? How do we break the silos? I think these are the issues that I don't really have an answer, and I hope we can have a dialogue around this. But I'm quite optimistic that if we have a democratic process and common space to resolve this, to do this dialogue, we will be able to build a common agenda and finally come together to finally move forward this political project of building a global pro-public movement. Thank you very much.